What's up, guys? Okay, so first thing, if you want to, you are welcome to hand in your New Futures project on Friday, July 10th by 11:59 without penalty. I will, of course, take them sooner. And I don't know, if you need extra time, shoot me an email. All right, so today's video, I'm going to talk quickly about your Futures project at a little bit more about layout, and then chat with you about sentence level details. So, first thing we want to think about in terms of sentence level details is now that you've had a chance to share bits and pieces of your project on the discussion board, it might help you get a sense of what your audience hears in what you've written so far. And that can then guide choices that you make in terms of explanation, detail, and then also tone, right? So some of these projects are going to require certain tonal choices that I think our class text really exemplify. So I think one thing to remember about Moore is that he is like deadpan irony master, right? So this is just an example of these letters that were appended and from the 1516 publication of Utopia all the way through contemporary publications up to and including the Open Utopia that we worked with, that work as these like ancillary to the main text. How should I put it? Other texts, they're called paratexts, that contribute to the broader kind of hoax that Moore and his friends were trying to perpetrate on their audience. And so Moore writes a letter to Peter Giles. And then the first line I wanted to draw your attention to in terms of like irony, right? So he says, this is Moore speaking in the character of the Thomas More. I was extremely pleased with the criticism of my work, with which you are acquainted by a clever person who put this dilemma about Utopia. If the facts as reported are true, I see some absurdities in them, but if fictitious, I find Moore's finished judgment in some respects wanting. Ha 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 ha, right? So a thing that we learn early on with writing is how to anticipate criticism, right? And so the way that Moore anticipates responses to his text is this sort of like thanking the critic for pointing out the potential absurdities of the project, which is itself the goal of the project, right? So like utopias are lots of things, but certainly in Moore's version, the utopia is pedagogical, right? It's an occasion to user test these sets of ideas, right? So he also says quite hilariously, second, by objecting to some things, this critic has given a tacit approval to the rest, right? So for those of you writing your utopias right now and thinking, have I gone too far? Are the changes that I've made too hyperbolic? Think about the ways in which the choices that you've made, hyperbolic or no, can affect in the reader sets of reasoned questioning that fall not only on the text that you wrote, but on the reader's own understanding of, for example, white supremacy, or for example, sustainability. And so how can you achieve, in addition to narration, structure, the actual content, those responses, elicit those responses? A way to do that is a kind of deadpan irony. So we're never sure, both in the letters that circulate through the text, and then in like the main body of the text itself, what Thomas More's position is. And in part, it's because of this like deadpan, right? So this is the very finale, second to last paragraph of book 2, where he says, right, so Raphael has finished speaking. When Raphael had thus made an end of speaking, though many things occurred to me, both concerning the manners and laws of that people, that seemed very absurd, as well in their way of making war, as in their notions of religion and divine matters, together with several other particulars, but chiefly what seemed the foundation of all the rest, their living in common without the use of money, by which all nobility, magnificence, splendor, and majesty, which, according to the common opinion, are the true ornaments of a nation, would be quite taken away. Ha 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 ha, right? Like, of course, more, both, I mean, really, like the character in the text and then the real man would at no point shed a tear over the loss of magnificence, splendor, and majesty, right? And so it's through, though, this kind of irony, this distance that he builds into the text, that he's able to both distance his own real self from incurring the wrath of nobility, magnificence, and splendor, but then also force me, the reader, to say, but haven't you spent this whole text aggrieved at these excesses, right? So, all right, so that's tone style. And then just a quick peek at Jameson's story, where she offers us a real masterclass in a variety of tones. So from, I don't know, this first kind of joke in the relationship between, or in the conversation between the evaluator and Ahua, whose name translates to love China, and then like that's what gets lost in the translation, right? You get this kind of joke that helps characterize the relationship between the two speakers in a way that like exposition just never could, right? So there's also this like kind of jokey, laid back tone and exchange between these characters that tells us they have a relationship without them having to explain they have a relationship. So that's what comes across in the dialogue. So how can you use tone if you're using dialogue to communicate what you would otherwise communicate in exposition? Similarly, we get in the more professional, air quotes, right, discourse in this story, these kinds of this kind of tone, right? My first professor in CBO told me never to earthromorpize, species, blah blah blah, right? So what would that be? It's like an appeal to both logic and authority, right? And so in a kind of exposition. And so what sorts of choices do you make in style and tone that lend authority to either the fiction or the, what shall I say, logic or reasoned responses in your text? Okay, final for this section, just covered audience. How does audience determine tone and choices that you make? We might also quickly say, again, if you're choosing to incorporate images, which I welcome you to do, you might want to think, what's a guideline for the relationship between text and image, right? So you can assume, if you like, about your reader that you know more than they do, right? So these are fictional. No one has ever visited the places that you're making. No one ever will. Part of the potential inquiries that we can make into the uses and drawbacks of utopias is the extent to which it's a single authored vision of a community, right? And so what's the relative success or failure of that? But anyway, so look to the models for a relationship between text and image. So we might think there's these Hanukkah illustrations that kind of map on to the story itself and help illustrate sort of the imaginative moments of Jemesson's story that we as readers might not have any clue to. So if you look, here's the first, and like, who is this character? Is it the evaluator? Is it one of the members of the science team? And as we move forward, we get this image that I think does help illustrate the transition that the figures that we don't know are experiencing. And then finally, one more image. I guess that's it. Is that it? Sorry, I thought there was a finale. Okay, so those are visual images. How do headings, these sort of fictive timestamps, the descriptions of images that failed to upload help create the atmosphere that Jemesson's trying to get across, and also give the reader a way to better understand or off-put the reader, so it keeps them on their toes. So again, thinking about what sorts of templates you might want to use in your own text. How does the relationship between visual iconography, titles, dates, headings, etc., help you better communicate your story to your reader? So, moving on to our next sentence or section, we might think about transitions. So, if this project is both an occasion to user test your solution and also a way about thinking about change across integrated systems, what can you do at the level of transition, either from sentence to sentence or section to section, to help integrate and demonstrate that sort of systems thinking? Okay, so one way to do it is this is like an old-timey grammar thing. It's called the known-new contract. So just take a second and look at the sentence below. Some astonishing questions about the nature of the universe have been raised by scientists exploring the nature of black holes in space. Which of the sentences below should follow the one above? Is it A, the collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no longer than a marble creates a black hole? Or a black hole is created by the collapse of a dead star into a point perhaps no larger than a marble? Okay, so the answer is C, right? Because sentence C begins where sentence A left off, with black holes, right? So while we're reading, we often feel that sentences are more cohesive if they begin with what's known to the reader, i.e. black holes from the previous sentence, and then introduce or end with what's new, i.e. the collapse of a dead star. This is the known-new contract, which gives us a sense of flow in our writing and also does for the reader a kind of definitional or expository work that really helps them keep focused. All right, let's look at this as an example in this template that I wrote. Okay, so my society that I've created has solved the problem of carbon emissions because all of the people live in cities that value walking over having to drive cars or vans or trucks or whatever over large distances. Okay, so I've come to the end of my geography section, and I conclude, that is why all the inhabitants of Sundowner live in cities built around concentric circles and equal distance from each other where geography permits. Okay, so what's known is the inhabitants of Sundowner do a thing, and what's new is this thing that I introduced here, where geography permits. Sorry, and I would say, and what am I doing? not permit a must use innovative technology. All right. Okay, so now I've introduced this notion of innovative technology, and then, so that's what's new. And then, dun, 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 technology is the next section, right? So we're going to pick up where geography prohibits easy building of their cities. Builders in Sundown deploy complex technology, right? So I'm going to start again with what's new, complex technology to create cities that allow for the great number of people to access the greatest amount of resources by walking. All right, so how can I revise that to make it a little bit better? So I already revised this sentence because I want to introduce what's coming next. And then I kind of want to start with what I already know. So I might just say, how about this? Complex technology. How about Sundowners use complex technology to create cities that allow for the greatest number of walking, maybe where geography prohibits easy building. Something like that. All right. So just keeping in mind both the type of integration that I'm asking for conceptually for this project can also happen at the sentence level, right? By using a technique a bit like this no new contract. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is if you're interested in doing a kind of sentence level revision work that will help develop, detail, and attract readers' attention, you might want to think about converting as many, not all, passive verbs to active verbs. There's nothing inherently wrong with a passive verb construction. However, and a lot of you guys are in the sciences, trained in the sciences, and there's a way that passive verb construction, such that it emphasizes the object over the subject, is really useful and a key component of the intellectual work that you do. In story writing, and even in expository, like analysis-driven argumentation style writing, academic style writing, it can be useful to have a down the line subject verb object. So just quickly, passive voice, which you probably already know, is a state of being verb that identifies who or what a noun is, was, or will be. Passive voice, grammatical subject express the theme of the main verb, that is the person or thing that undergoes the action or has its state changed. So if you want to replace the state of being verb with passive voice in the sentences below with a strong verb. So the tiger was upset when the antelope ran away. We might say, how do we do that one? Okay, so the tiger was upset when the antelope ran away. Maybe the antelope upset the tiger by running away, which, I mean, the stakes of this are negligible. Antelope, tiger, whatever. But think about a context in which I am writing about, I don't know, a natural space that's been polluted, say for example. And I constantly write in the passive voice something along the lines of, I don't know, the field was filled with garbage, or garbage has been piling up in this field for generations, right? So there's a way in which passive voice, in its emphasis on the object of the noun erases the subject. And in certain contexts, the erasure of the subject can also signal the erasure of responsibility, right? So the classic passive verb is mistakes were made, not I made a mistake by illegally dumping garbage, or the factory down the road illegally dumped garbage, right? And so there's occasions in which the naming of the subject, the putting into order of subject, verb, object has like an ethical dimension as well as a grammatical component, right? Okay, next sentence is more of an auxiliary verb stitch. So you might say the man walked on the platform. And then the final, there are 3 things that make me feel excited for spring break. I'm excited for spring break for 3 reasons. Might be one example. All right, let's look at a passive voice revision at the sentence level of my admittedly very breezy draft. So that citizens may walk, buildings are built, with breezeways adjoining them, face to face, and they are all multi-purpose. All right, not a great sentence. It's got some parallelism problems too. So we might say first, so that citizens may walk, buildings are built, with breezeways adjoining them, face to face, maybe and for a range of purposes. All right, so what do we make of buildings are built? Not at the level of mistakes were made, right? Erasing the doer of the deed from the complicity of like a problem like polluting, right? But I'm not also at the level of the deer and the antelope in the example sentence. So somewhere in the middle. So that citizens may walk, buildings are built. We might say instead, so that we know who it is that's doing the building. We might say, what shall I call my builders in this fictional society? How about domus? I don't know what that means. Build. It could be maybe buildings. That could be more specific. Build buildings with. Those are my builders. With breezeways adjoining, etc. Right? So revising for passive voice, this is my final note, helps you to create a kind of clarity in your writing that engages readers. And at the same time, as with grammar sort of in general, can have broader implications, both for your story, if you're trying to develop out, right, these details of like, who are the different people in the society and what is it that they do? And then at that final level, at the level of sort of like social justice or ethics or ideology, ensuring active verbs can help ensure a kind of ethical clarity, right? All right, you are welcome to spend some time with verbs that rely on adverbs, has had, combined nouns, which are demonstrated in these sentences. I will not belabor it any longer. And so, again, I encourage you, if you have a chance, to take a few minutes and identify the verbs in a paragraph from your draft or in the entirety of the draft itself, and then think about making passive verbs active and replacing verbs that rely on auxiliary constructions or adverbs with strong verbs. And so my final note here is this nice list of strong verbs that you can use, right? So instead of, I had an argument with the referee, I would say, I shouted my complaints at the referee or something like that. So anyway, all right, that's it for today. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much.